Welcome to Faith and Science. I'm Dr. John Ashton. The Academies of Science in the different countries around the world provide guidance for educational institutions and, of course, places for science policy, particularly related to education. And it was interesting that a number of years ago now, back in June 2006, an international body of Academies of Sciences released a statement on the teaching of evolution. Now, this statement was signed by over 65 member academies of science around the world. And so, for example, the Australian Academy of Sciences, the Austrian Academy of Sciences, the Royal Academies for Science and the Arts of Belgium, the Brazilian Academy of Sciences, and so forth, the Chinese Academy of Sciences. And so there's a list there, the Union of German Academies of Sciences and Humanities, and so forth. And so these academies of sciences around the world signed this statement that they've learned that in various parts of the world within science courses taught at certain public systems of education, scientific evidence, data and testimonial theories about the origins and evolution of life on Earth are being concealed, denied or confused with theories not testable by science. Now, they don't spell those out, but my intuition is that they're referring to the biblical creation position, at least, would be one of those things. And what they are saying is that we urge decision makers, teachers and parents to educate all children about methods and discoveries of science and to foster an understanding of science of nature. Well, I mean, we would agree with that latter part, of course. I would anyway. But then they go on and they say, we agree that the following evidence-based facts about the origin and evolution of the Earth and of life on this planet have been established by numerous observations and independently derived experimental results from a multitude of scientific disciplines. Even if there are still many open questions about the precise details of evolutionary change, scientific evidence has never contradicted these results. So that's a very interesting statement that they've made there. And I'll just say it again, that what they're saying is, and this is what they've written, that we agree that the following evidence-based facts about the origins and evolution of the Earth and of life on this planet have been established by numerous observations and independently derived experimental results from a multitude of scientific disciplines. So here we are essentially saying that, evolution has been established. And the 4 points that they make is that the first point is that in a universe that has evolved towards its present configuration for some 11 to 15 billion years, our Earth formed approximately 4.5 billion years ago. Well, I would contest that the measurements that are made there, for example, on the age of the Earth based on a lot of radiometric dating methods and dating of meteorites and that. And, of course, these methods really haven't been proved. They're actually based on a number of unproven assumptions. And also the age of the Earth calculations, largely based on the Big Bang theory, again, which is unproven. It's based on a whole lot of hypothetical assumptions, and there's a large body of scientists that object to the Big Bang theory being taught as a scientific fact because of the overwhelming evidence that doesn't fit it. So it's very interesting that they've signed this statement. So statement number 2 is, since its formation, the Earth, its geology and its environments has changed under the effect of numerous physical and chemical forces and continues to do so well. I think I'm happy with that. But point number 3, this is an interesting one. Life appeared on Earth at least 2.5 billion years ago. The evolution soon after of photosynthetic organisms enabled from at least 2 billion years ago the slow transformation of the atmosphere to one containing substantial quantities of oxygen. In addition to the release of the oxygen that we breathe, the process of photosynthesis is the ultimate source of fixed energy and food upon which human life on the planet depends. Now that's very interesting. That's, again, an assertion about an age, and those ages, again, are based on largely on radiometric dating, which, again, as I said, is not proven, has never been validated for prehistorical dates. But it's very interesting. It says that evolution, so some life form, they don't say which started, but that's the general picture, that some little, simple-celled organism did form by itself. And then the photosynthetic organisms began to produce oxygen. Now, we know from what we observe today in plants that the system to produce oxygen is called photosystem 2. It's a highly complex molecular machine involving, quite complex structures. And what we have no mechanism to date as to how such a complex structure could actually form so early on, let alone the first cell, as I'll talk about in a little bit. So it's interesting here. What they're saying is that we've got numerous observations, independently derived experimental results from a multitude of disciplines that establish that, life formed at that particular time. And that soon after this mechanism of photosynthesis took after. And then it says, point 4 is, since its first appearance on Earth, life has taken many forms, all of which continue to evolve in different ways. It's quite interesting that this is a statement that is assigned by so many academies. The Royal Society, the United Kingdom Royal Society, United States National Academy of Sciences, the African Academy of Sciences, and so forth, have all signed this particular statement. But I want to sort of look at this statement a little bit further because this is governing education and these scientists have signed, but there's overwhelming evidence that they're wrong, that it's impossible. I'll just read you a section from a statement or an article written by James M. Tour, who's one of the world's leading synthetic chemists. And what he is talking about is, and this is something he wrote, by the way, on the 19th of January back in, wrote in May 2019. May 2019 in response to a talk that he gave earlier in the year in January 2019. And in that talk, he discussed a paper that was published in Nature. Now, Nature is one of the world's top science journals. You'll earn a lot of academic credibility publishing the journal Nature. And this was an article that was published in Nature by Professor Jack Szostak, spelled Szostak. Now, he is a Nobel Prize winner. He's a professor of genetics at Harvard University. And so here, again, we have one of the top scientists in the world. And he published this article in Nature. But this is what Dr. Tour writes about this article. He says, regarding Jack Szostak's article in Nature, I think it displays to the world a simplicity that is unfounded. Now, this article is about the origin of life on Earth and how they're doing experiments now and they're getting close to sort of understanding the mechanism whereby life, first life started, the origin of life. And so, as he said, it gives the reader a sense that we are much closer to finding a solution to life's origin than we really are. Indeed, I specifically said in my talk that one day we might figure out the chemistry of the origin of life, but that day is far from today. We are nowhere close. But Stozak feels that we are not far from cracking this problem. I differ strongly, and I think the synthetic chemists can be the most sceptical because we know what molecules do and do not do in an environment before life. Now, one of the reasons I'm reading this to you is that it illustrates how there is a lot of misunderstanding by highly educated people about the complexity of the origin of life. And he points out that in Sostak's article, that showing that in a single step, heat and light can make a compound that resembles a dehydrated nucleotide, one of the components that would be in DNA, for example, although it is not a nucleotide since it was not devoid of stereochemistry. And so in this paper, Stozak showed that from simple sugars and cyanide derivatives, this nucleotide, this important compound, could be formed. And what happened was then a professor of psychiatry at a Canadian university wrote to James Tour saying that he'd made a big error in his Dallas lecture, since another leading synthetic chemist by the name of Sutherland had made some of these simple compounds that are believed to be the precursors of life. But as Tour pointed out, he was very familiar with Sutherland's work. James Tour then writes, the chemist writes, is that this professor of psychology has actually been misled by Stozak to believe that all this chemistry, the amazing, the ability to start and build some of the components that would be necessary for a simple cell to form, that is the article led people to believe that all this chemistry is worked out and simply heat and light can work this magic. And so James Tour writes, how misled even professors can become from these writings in Nature. The Academy is led astray. And so what he's saying is that because this professor of genetics simplified the problem so much, people think that it's quite feasible for the chemistry required for a simple cell to form can happen. And Tour goes on to point out the major issue is that heat and light cannot afford that conversion from the base compound ethylene glycol, glycerol, or the sugar products derived after their oxidation. And he goes on to say, quote, to present that heat and light can act on these compounds, even if we are to use, and he goes on and describes some complicated compounds, to afford anything like the RNA nucleotide, so that's similar to the DNA nucleotide, is incorrect and misleading. So I'll just summarise that again. To present that heat and UV light can act on these compounds to afford anything like the listed RNA nucleotide is incorrect and misleading. And he goes on to explain why. There are so many steps involved in such a transformation. But, he says, to biologists, such as Stozak, explaining to the non-expert, he feels that these details are not essential for him to point out. But these details are everything. Stereochemistry is essential. Now, stereochemistry is sort of like molecules can look the same but be mirror images of one another and have different structures. So an example would be how our right and left hands look similar, but one is the mirror image of the other. So you can't put your right hand in a left-handed glove. Now, this is very important in biochemistry and living systems, in that there are a lot of right-handed and left-handed molecules. And if it's not the right stereochemistry, even though it might have the same atoms and molecules in its structure, it won't work. And that's why he points out stereochemistry is essential, as are the reaction details. And he highlights, then Tour goes on to point out that Sutherland took 10 to 12 steps with multiple reagents to make the synthesis of this compound work. So, and he says Stojek showed it in just one steps with a few simple reagents. And he points out that that is misleading of Stojek. And so what he's saying is this, that the article that appeared in Nature showed just one step involving a few simple reagents, whereas in actual fact the researcher that did the experiment involved 10 to 12 steps with multiple more reagents. And so in the paper in Nature it was stated that UV light and heat in the presence of UV light and phosphate nucleotides were formed. And Tour points out that he finds that deceptive or disingenuous, he uses the word, and betrays the depth of the exacting chemistry involved. And he points out even that simple little formation of cyanoethylene requires the cyanoethine requires the generation of ethyne by the addition of water to calcium carbide and bubbling that through hydrogen cyanide and a copper 2 solution. And Tour points out, try that in a puddle somewhere. Try to keep the cyanoethane from decomposing in the presence of 254 nanometre UV light source, which seems to be abundant on the Earth at that time. And so he points out that the scientists that actually made the compound, that you couldn't do it in a puddle. In order to do it, they had a detailed protocol of a whole lot of reactions that they had to do in order. They used very advanced chemistry laboratories. They used the best equipment and tools available. They had at their disposal hundreds of years of chemical literature to aid them in understanding the possible chemistry. And so the complexity is enormous. And he points out that, some people think that, well, it was done in the lab, so that way, if it's done in the lab, it could be done on the early Earth before there was any life. Somehow it could be done. And he points out that no way, and this is Tour speaking, he says, no way, I work with students all the time. This chemistry is exacting and painful in the lab. And even with the experimental protocols in hand, it would be hard for anyone, only a well-experienced PhD in synthetic chemistry students, to reproduce the work of Sutherland. And what if they did not have the protocols at hand? It would be much harder. And he goes on to say, and what if they had to do it in a cave or an outdoor puddle of water? It would be harder. And so essentially what he's saying is, most people that like to disagree with me or to insufficiently appreciate what I'm talking about are untrained. And so this highlights a very important fact that here we had a paper published in Nature that greatly oversimplified the chemistry involved in synthesising just one possible ingredient that may somehow have been involved in the origin of the first life. And so here, however, we have the Academy of Sciences statement, saying that this has been verified by experiment. It hasn't. Let me read some statements that Tour, as I said, Tour is one of the most highly cited synthetic chemists in the world. He builds the new molecules. That's his job, is to build molecules. Let me just read to you what he writes. He says, I have written a long article on the origin of life, and he gives a reference. And again, if you want to look this up, anybody listening, just Google jmtour.com. That's jmtour.com, and click on the Personal Topics Evolution Creation page, and you can read what he's written. And he says, it is clear chemists and biologists are clueless. I wrote, those who think scientists understand the issue of prebiotic chemistry, that's the origin of life, are wholly misinformed. Nobody understands them. Maybe one day we will, but that day is far from today. It would be far more helpful and hopeful to expose students to the massive gaps in our understanding. They may find a firmer and possibly a radically different scientific theory. The basis upon which we as scientists are relying is so shaky that we must openly state the situation for what it is. It is a mystery. So that is, the origin of life is a mystery. Note that since the time of my submission of that commentary cited above, articles continue to be published on prebiotic chemistry. The origin of life, often encompassing the terms of prebiotic chemistry or biogenesis, that's how non-living molecules are supposed to have formed a living cell. The article that I cite above is long and I need to repeat it, but even in that article I never address the issue of information. The informational coding within the DNA or RNA that corresponds to the sequence of nucleic acids is primary to the entire discussion of life. Some would rightly argue that the information is even more fundamental than the matter upon which is encoded. I merely showed that the requisite molecules, lipids, proteins, nucleic acids and carbohydrates, are so unlikely to have occurred in the states and quantities needed that we could never have gotten to the point of figuring out the genesis of the requisite code or information. He's talking about the DNA code. The code is analogous to a difference between the Library of Congress and a big box of alphabetic letters. The library has a huge amount of embedded information, while the random box of letters has little. So the origin of first life is the nail in the coffin, closed on the emergence of biological evolution. Without that first life, or simple cell, which requires the 4 molecule types plus information, all proposals regarding biological evolution are without a base of life. And it is difficult to discuss biology without life. But even if one were given all the molecules needed in complete stereochemical purity and the information code, could a cell be constructed using the chemical and biochemical tools we have today? I have written about such a hypothetical experiment and how it would be impossible using today's expertise to even construct the lipid bilayer, namely the exterior packaging that holds the cell's nanomachinery in place. Just the lipid bilayer, which itself surrounds thousands of nanosystems, is beyond our ability to synthesise. The conclusion of that thought experiment is that life based upon amino acids, nucleotides, saccharides and lipids is an anomaly. Life should not exist anywhere in our universe. Life should not even exist on the surface of the earth. Yet we are led to believe that 3.8 billion years ago the requisite compounds could be found in some cave or undersea vent and somehow they assembled themselves into the first cell. If you have knowledge of chemical or biochemical synthesis or nanosystem assembly, I encourage you to read that short article and judge for yourself. If I'm wrong, then enlighten me on my error. If I'm correct, then ponder how far afield we have gone in projecting to the public our knowledge of life's origin. Finally, there is a severe discord between the claims of the origin of life researchers and the actual state of research. It is time to call out on the research until we can define what would constitute an advancement rather than sophistry. So that's a very, very powerful statement that really makes us question this big statement by the International Academy of Sciences. And it points out how our education system has been hijacked and how highly learned people are making assertions on things that really they haven't researched properly and haven't fully understood. This is a very serious situation. I would suggest that listeners that are interested in this area have a look at James M. Tour's websites and also some of his lectures that are up on YouTube. But it's interesting that the publication of statements by these Academy of Sciences that are essentially in many cases aimed at stopping the teaching of creation, of biblical creation. And yet we have no scientific explanation for the origin of life. According to the chemistry that we know and can study today, it's absolutely impossible for life to have formed on Earth. And here I've just read some statements by one of the world's top synthetic chemists, points out the chemistry that would be involved in such a synthesis, let alone the information encoded in the DNA for replication and so forth. And a similar situation is in the case of the Big Bang theory. It's claimed the universe is expanding, but really when we look at it, we can't really properly measure that to ascertain that. We have, no really clear-cut way of measuring that. The measurements that are reported, again, tend to be equivocal. And so again, there's so much information that is out here that is just on the basis of assertions and unproven theories and hypotheses that is being taken as a given. And this is very misleading to the public. There are some also very good articles on these issues on the Creation Ministries International website, which is creation.com. If you just Google creation.com and enter in a search question like the age of the earth or on evolution, creation, these sort of things. They have a lot of resources. Also, there's my book, In 6 Days, Why 50 Scientists Choose to Believe in Creation. This book is available also free on the creation.com website. Just enter In 6 Days in the search engine and it'll come up on the index there and you'll see if you click on it and then a list of names will appear down the side and they will give you the names of different of the different contributors and their chapters, such as John P. Marcus has an excellent chapter on the mathematical probability of why it's impossible for new genes to form by chance in the theory of evolution. And of course you can re-listen to these programs by Googling 3ABN Australia, all one word, .org.au and click on the listen button. I'm Dr. John Ashton. You've been listening to Faith and Science. Have a great day.
You've been listening to a production of 3ABN Australia Radio.